morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm Naitik. I'm from Acies Innovations. We are a knowledge management a consulting firm based out of Bangalore and Singapore. The overall context of this workshop, as you see, it's called Technnovate for Impact, How to Be Smart. Today, we will be looking at how can organizations technovate uh, to become smart and through that increase their impact in whichever sector they're working in. First thing first, would love to introduce a little bit about us, who we are, what we are doing in this sector. I just want to invite my colleagues here to introduce themselves. Dr. Randir, if you could maybe go ahead and do a quick introduction, that would be helpful.
Thanks, Nitik, and hi everyone. I'm Dr. Randeep Pushpa, co-founder and CEO of Acies Innovations. We are a management consulting firm providing services for NGOs, formed specifically with the intention of helping NGOs become more smart and more efficient and effective in the way they manage their processes and adopt technology. So this is what have been our background based on which we have been evolving. Have been very active in the Indian space with respect to working with NGOs, helping them streamline their activities, be more technology driven, be more process driven. So this is what we have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Randir. Jacob, would love to hear from you and introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Jacob. I overlook thought leadership here at Acies. Also look at content and content strategy, and it's great to be here.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jacob and Dr. Randir. So everyone, what we are trying to do here is, on one side, yes, of course, we're trying to tell a story about uh, how to technovate to be smart, but at the same time, we also care about how organizations can increase their impact, looking at new perspective. And that's where Technovate for Impact is that new lens we wish to provide to you through this workshop. Talking a little bit about us, as Randeep said, we are a global consultancy. We've worked with several organizations, companies across the globe, NGOs across the country, and slowly moving internationally. What we do here is we use our expertise in knowledge management, technology enablement, AI to help organizations become more streamlined and aim for scalability and sustainability. That's where this whole concept of Technovate for Impact really came in, where we look at both technology and innovation to increase impact. So one of our primary goals in the development sector is to increase the collective social impact. And that's where the Technovate for Impact team has come together to help increase that social impact. And that's what this entire workshop is going to be about. So to say in a gist, we are here on a mission to help build smart organizations and to make them streamlined, sustainable, and scalable. And that's the agenda of this workshop on how do you become smart? What is the concept of smart? How do you technovate? What are the problems in this area? So before we get started, would love to sort of also understand the kind of audience that are here. So all those who are live would love to hear from you what sector and industry you are from. That would really help us understand who's on this workshop as well. If you could add in your thoughts, comments in the chat, that would be really helpful. So I see a couple of people from the private sector, a few from the non-profit. Right. Thank you so much, Anthony. So maybe while people figure out, how to add these comments, maybe we could get started. If there's any questions or if you want to add inputs at any point, please feel free to type in the chat. Jacob would be monitoring the chat, and Jacob, if there's any important question that comes up, please feel free to stop me, and we can go ahead from there.
Sure.
Thank you so much. Thanks all. So we will be getting started. First of all is a quick context on Technnovate for impact. Now, who is this workshop for? As you may have seen our workshop brief as well. Very honestly, any organization can really benefit from this workshop. As much as we have contextualized it to the development sector and looked at nonprofits and NGOs primarily. Any organization, be it in the private sector, academic sector, can benefit from it. The kind of audience who will be able to benefit most would be NGOs, nonprofits, academic institutes that are focused on impact, foundations, donors, CSRs. If you're looking to fund NGOs, I think this would be a great workshop for all of you. So what we're gonna do in this workshop is present our S.M.A.R.T framework, which brings in the two pillars, technology and innovation, which it marries the two of them and brings in the concept of Technnovate for impact, and hence introduces the concept of S.M.A.R.T. So that's what this entire workshop is going to be about. First, what we would like to do is conduct an activity of sort wherein we would want to run through one or two case studies, and these case studies are contextualized again in the development sector, and the idea here is to sort of understand what the problem in these nonprofits are and look at that situation, analyze that situation, and see what the major problem there is. So having said that, we'll be moving on to the case studies. So case study one, it contextualizes to an NGO called Abhi. The context is this is an NGO that works in the education sector. They have worked for several years. They have a few, close to 100 different members, 60 employees, 45 volunteers. And they've created several bridge programs, and they worked, as you may know, for these finish the school programs for underprivileged communities in the society. Now, just want to highlight that this is a fictional case study. I invite Jacob to narrate the case study so we can analyze it after.
Sure. Thanks, Natik. Hello, everyone. We'll do a quick read-along session. In case the text is too small for you to read, I will be reading it out. So the point is we'll try to understand what the NGO is, what it does, and what the situation it is currently in, and try to figure out what are the potential problems that might have added the NGO in the situation. So I'll just read it out so that you can also follow. So this is the context. Abhi is an NGO that works in the education sector. They have 60 employees and 45 volunteers on the team. They have created several bridge programs that help kids from underprivileged communities finish school. The employees at Abhi are passionate about what they do. They have several WhatsApp groups created by their own initiative where they communicate and share all their files. But WhatsApp is not all they use. Sometimes they resort to the age-old way of emailing as well. Because of this, sometimes they end up with multiple versions of the same file. But hey, better to have more than to have none, right? They make sure that they note down the names of the beneficiaries and the number of beneficiaries helped in their own Excel sheets. They also add their own twists and flavor to their own Excel sheet documentation. Abhi's goal and objectives aren't what they used to be when they started off because of challenges related to government, municipalities, or kids. But the folks at Abhi kept working how they've always worked, and they believe that they have helped over 25,000 students. And they have the Excel sheets to prove this number too. Abhi also works with several partners and vendors. Abhi tries to maintain good relations with them, but sometimes there are delays in payment that creates tension. But it can't be helped. Delays are just a part of the process, right? So this is the context, and let's look at the situation. S.M.A.R.T Foundation, their primary donor, has requested a detailed program review to reconsider future funding. They have cited a few concerns regarding the data, operations, and the program. What could be some of the issues highlighted by Star Foundation? So this can be whatever you've understood from the context and the situation. What do you think are some of the problems that could have been highlighted by the foundation? You can put in the chat box. We can discuss the messages there.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jacob. So while any comments or questions or thoughts come in, I thought maybe I could get started here. Just want to see if anyone has any thoughts or problems they think are what can be contextualized to this case study. Jacob, Randir, if you have anything to say, feel free to drop it in the chat box as well.
Sure, Nitik.
Okay, so while we allow people some time to think, looking at it at a surface level, a couple of things that we can probably dissect here are, one is, of course, that this is a seasoned NGO. It's been in the space for quite a bit of time. So if the donor has come back and has said, we want to review this process, and there may be lack of or a shortage of funding in the future, or if they refuse to fund this NGO, it could be seen that this is a problem that has probably persisted over time, which means that these could be a problem which has been happening over and over across that particular NGO. One thing that while Jacob was narrating is that there are several WhatsApp groups where people take their own initiative and they've created these WhatsApp groups. And as we all know, even in our organizations, we have several groups. In these groups, we keep sending messages, files. Sometimes, like Jacob said, we send some of these files over emails, but sometimes it's just easier to send it on WhatsApp, right? Because it's 8 p.m. in the night and we don't really have the patience to go online. So what happens here is that the knowledge of that organization, as Randir was talking about in the beginning, gets distributed across different groups, different channels, and retrieving that becomes a challenge. So now this is again a question that we can ask: is this a problem that the donor is looking at? Maybe, maybe not. We can discuss that in the future. Yeah, lack of structure. I think next thing that I was going to is a lot of NGOs that face really the comment that Jacob has put in, the lack of structure in Excel documentation could be problematic in the long run. We've worked with several NGOs as well, like Abhi, where we see that a lot of the information or the data they collect is in the form of Excel sheets, or typically in the development sector referred to as the MIS systems, where there's sometimes thousands and thousands of rows, thousands and thousands of columns where data is being collected and mapped very well. But again, at the end of the day, does Excel become Excel? Is Excel the right choice of doing this data collection, right? And that's where, even if many and many beneficiaries have been added here, it becomes a question of, is this the right system for the organization? And second, I think one interesting thing is, in the third paragraph, you may see they make sure that they note down the names of beneficiaries and number of beneficiaries in their own Excel sheets. Now, this is a very common thing. While many organizations try to maintain one MIS, because of a lack of system, these MISs get duplicated. You get, at the end of the year, there are multiple Excel sheets. Maybe the director of the organization has one, the project lead at the organization has another, the fundraising department has another, and they all refer to different Excel sheets. It may lead to different inferences at the end of the day. Moving forward in terms of the goals and objectives, another problem that we probably can see here is that the donor doesn't seem to be happy with the fact that the NGO Abhi has been working with only 25,000 students for these many years. Yes, of course, it's a very good number. There's a lot of impact reach in terms of quantitatively, but are numbers enough, right? These are questions. If you've been in the development sector, you may have seen a lot of donors and funders come back and say, are these numbers enough, right? So now that becomes another point where we may need to look at and say, this is one of the possible challenges the donor really wants to analyze. Then comes a couple of other behavior patterns of the organization. There were a couple of challenges, like there are policy changes, municipality reforms coming in, or the school kids, for instance, the school may make some new rules. Now, to what extent can the NGO handle this becomes again a question. Now, keeping all of this in mind and sort of trying to contextualize to what the problem in these NGOs can be, that's what we have tried to do here. Through each of these paragraphs that you see, we have contextualized a specific problem, and at the center of it is the first P that we want to introduce, and I hope you could all remember this P. It's the P we call process. In fact, it's one of Randir's favorite words in our organization. We have process at the center, and what we have tried to do here is dissect the different problems in the organization and bucket them. First, we have standardization, where different admin processes. I think one of the last paragraphs looked at partnerships with several partners and vendors, as you see here. Now, to what extent is this partnership well maintained? To what extent are the processes that are built with these partners really in place becomes a question. So when we look at these admin processes, it could be giving funds or making payments to vendors. So if you are on the other side of NGOs, if you're vendors to NGOs, you may have noticed that a lot of times there's a lot of delays in terms of the payments that you get. Or if you work at a particular NGO, you may have seen that a lot of times when you, let's say, go on a business trip for, let's say, fundraising, and you get your amount to be reimbursed, but that doesn't really happen on time because there's a lot of delays in submission of bills, approval of bills, etc. So now all of these can be contextualized to admin processes, where there is a problem of standardization, wherein if Jacob and I are two employees at an NGO, Jacob may wish to submit his travel bills by WhatsApp, but I wish to submit my travel bills by emails, right? That's another problem that we saw in the NGO Abhi, wherein when people follow different systems to do the same kind of task or follow the same process, then there is a lack of standardization, which makes it difficult for the organization to be streamlined, right? And that's one of the first S's that we are introducing. Next aspect is communication. One key element that we have noticed in a lot of these NGOs is to what extent is the communication standardized, right? So a lot of us may have emails for communication, WhatsApp for communication, these days maybe Telegram for communication, or sometimes we may use Slack or Teams for communication. But we always resort to different modes for communicating different things, wherein all files are shared over email, but all the chat happens over WhatsApp. So that distributes the knowledge to different places, the conversations to different places, which makes it difficult for that particular organization to keep track of what's happening where. So if there are any thoughts, inputs on standardization, if any of you have gone through these challenges, feel free to drop in a message in the chat. Just looking to see if there's any comments. Right. Right. So moving from standardization to the next aspect, automation, I think a problem that Jacob also highlighted in the chat here is using, we're taking Excel sheets as one example, using Excel or Google Sheets as MISs. How many times do donors come back and say that they don't really need to see numbers? What they want to see is a data visualization. They want to see a dashboard. That's where we've contextualized this problem as, One of the reasons the donor, as we see here, Star Foundation, being the primary donor, may have reconsidered the future funding is because they are not able to effectively see what is that impact uh, NGO is actually going after, right? Is it helping 25,000 people, or is it also uh, understanding and evaluating the outcomes here in such a way that you can present it on a dashboard to say, out of this 25,000 people, 12,000 people were able to graduate with, let's say, distinction, and they were placed in so and so many organizations. In that, maybe about 45% were men, sorry, 45% were male students, and maybe remaining 55% were female students, which means that there is a trend that female students are probably more interested in these programs than male students, which means that that's an opportunity for them to make more constructive decisions wherein they can curate their programs to that particular category. So this is where automation really comes in. One aspect is Excel sheets, but we could also look into the bill payments, travel management, leave management, where a lot of our admins within the organization are facing a lot of challenges in terms of how they input the data, how they pass that data from one department to another. So this is the second thing that we looked at, which is automation. Number three we have is resilience. Now, this may be a very uh, new term to a lot of us here, but it's about the organization's capability to handle unexpected changes, right? Like, for example, we've seen that policies keep changing all the time. So, one recurring theme that has come up, and that's happening a lot of times, is a lot of NGOs that we speak to say now the donors are interested in either funding for climate change or funding for gender related activities. Now, this is where a lot of these NGOs feel that, like, let's say, for example, if the NGO is in education or water and sanitation sector, they feel that funding towards them is low because the country's policy has moved towards going green, or reducing the impact on climate change, which means that a lot of CSRs, a lot of large companies would be interested in funding there. Now, this is actually an unexpected change which the NGO had not planned for. So how resilient is that NGO to handle such changes becomes a question. Now, this could happen at a government level, or it could happen at a municipality level, or it could even happen at a single beneficiary level. But what we're trying to say here is that,
Nitik, can I
sorry.
add to you?
Yes, absolutely, Randeep.
Thank you, Nitik. So these unexpected changes, we just wanted to highlight. For example, for the past couple of years, have NGOs have been going through multiple unexpected changes. Pandemic definitely was one of the things, but governmental regulations were also there. So these couple of things, for example, policy changes. There were huge policy changes that were happening at government level in India. So that how is that impacting, and how resilient is the organization to handle that? Second is with respect to pandemic. If you see pandemic, one of the huge major impact of pandemic was with respect to the funding being available for the NGOs, right? I mean, so how did the NGO handle this? I mean, how resilient are their processes and the systems of the NGOs to handle this kind of an impact? I mean, whether you're able to still carry on with that, whether you're able to change in the way you have been giving your services, right? I mean, you're reaching out with respect to one of those areas in which, for example, be that sanitation or child nutrition or with education. How are you able to change the way you're handling this, approaching this, and still catering to the specific areas in which you are working? So that is the key area that Naitik is highlighting here. Go ahead, Naitik.
That's a great point, Randir. In fact, I think a change that we all can relate to is definitely pandemic. Be it non-profits, be it academic institutes, or MSMEs, consulting firms like ours. Our resilience really was shown here in terms of how we were able to handle that forced digital transformation that came in. I remember, Randir, back in 2020, when we were speaking to a lot of these NGOs, one question was a lot of the donors are pushing the NGOs, not pushing, but it had become an inevitable activity for NGOs to get involved in COVID relief, right? And now that is an unexpected change, and several NGOs actually had to shut down because they weren't able to handle a change like this. But several other NGOs which had a good process system that was enabled were able to actually transform themselves digitally from 40-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old people who had never used technology were there coming on Zoom calls, Google Meet calls, attending on a daily basis through their partners, through their children's laptop to actually understand how do you actually support and run the organization online. So thank you so much, Randy. That in fact was very valid point to uh, the point of resilience when it comes to processes, because resilience resilient processes is what actually makes these processes sustainable, and regardless of what change, as time keeps going forward, these processes need to be in place and make sure they continue to exist. Another key point here after resilience towards sustainability of these processes, the second S is continuous improvement. And Randir, would love to hear your thoughts on this as well in terms of why organizations need to continuously improve themselves. I'll start off by saying the fact that for an organization to be sustainable, it means that they cannot resort to doing the same things over and over again. And that's where I think one thing that we saw here, if you see the 25,000 students, uh, the donor may have been unhappy with this, probably because the number is not going up, right? So if this was a private organization, the way investors would have looked at it is very different from the way donors look at NGOs and non-profit. So what is that continuous improvement becomes a last question. And Randeep, through your understanding, if you wish to add here, please feel free to.
Okay. Thanks, Nitik, and thanks for bringing up that point on continuous improvement. See, continuous improvement is a reality of for any of the areas that we are working as human beings. We continuously improve, okay, and those who don't continuously improve die down. If you look into the corporate sector, it's like literal bloodshed will happen. I mean, uh, new technologies come, you don't adapt to it, you will die down, okay. And good thing about a non-profit sector is that a lot of inefficiency is still accommodated, okay. That we have seen, irrespective of whether you're inefficient or not, you're able to survive. That is a reality in the non-profit sector. But the question we should ask is that the right way of operating, right? I mean, how does inefficiency comes? Inefficiency comes in when we stop learning, when we stop improving the way we are working, when you stop inculcating and embedding the new technologies that evolve across the spectrum in which we are working. So what happens is that in the corporate sector, if you're inefficient, definitely your quality of your products come down, the market size with which you're catering comes down. But in the case of non-profits, okay, what happens with inefficiency is that your social return on investment will come down. For
Absolutely.
the money that you're spending, how many of those needy that you're able to reach out will come down. Your ability to apply technology will come down. Okay. Now there is another catch here. When you are slow in learning, what happens sometimes is that you will not be able to learn at all. So you one fine day you cannot start. Okay, now onwards I'll start learning. No, once you stop learning, it will be difficult for you to start it because you've lost the train has moved and you have lost it. You will not be able to jump into it because the technology is so damn grown differently that you will not be able to get into it because your system is not will not be able to cater to that. You don't have the muscles to get into it. So it is important that you learn on a regular basis and continuously improve. And very important because your social return on investment will come down drastically, and that's a reality. We have this is a sad reality from whatever we have seen. Efficiency in NGOs is extremely high. You go to an NGO and go to that same NGO after 5 years or after 10 years, you will find that the way they are performing the different activities doesn't change much. Okay, because reflection and learning to a large extent doesn't come there. Okay, because NGOs can do away. I mean, there is. We even with inefficiency they don't die down faster. We are seeing many NGOs where who are inefficient but they're still surviving, which is not good for the system overall if you look at it. Okay, so Netik, that is my point on the need for continuous improvement.
No, absolutely, Randy. Thanks so much for bringing that in. And in fact, that connects us back to the point of the pandemic that you made in terms of how, and Jacob has in fact just run a poll here. So everyone feel free to answer this poll, which is, was the pandemic a catalyst in bringing technological advancements, right? So there are two things. One is, as Randir was talking about, the organization needs to, on its own, have that motivation to continuously improve. That's number one. Uh, but there are times when these unexpected changes help in that continuous improvement as well. Like, I think pandemic was one big example of that, because the way the pandemic was, we all had to become technologically proficient. We had to understand how to be on calls, how to actually move through this entire online video call platform to go through our daily work. And in fact, one good example is, I think when all of us joined the session today, it took us less than maybe 10-15 seconds to figure out what is what, because the video button, the present button, the poll button, the question button, the view button, these are all very similar, be it across Teams, Zooms, Meet, doesn't really matter, right? So although this was a slightly new platform for a lot of us, we could still find a way through it, and we could immediately access it, because we have improved over the last few years in terms of how we access technology, which means the pandemic automatically made us more technologically proficient and allowed us to continuously improve ourselves. So thanks again, Randeep, for that point. Now that brings us to two other elements under processes, and that's where we want to introduce our third S, scalability, in terms of, number one, how modular are these processes, right? So when you look at the process of fundraising in a non-profit, I want to take that as an example because it's easier to explain. Or um, uh, in a lot of NGOs, when fundraising as a process begins, there's of course a lot of these leaders who come back and say that, there is a possible lead, why don't you go get a donation from some of these? Or in some cases, um, we may see that through emails or through grants. Hello.
Yes, you're audible. You're audible.
We can hear you. We can hear you, Netik.
So I think there is some issue. Hello, Anthony. I think there is some issue. I'm able to. My own voice from before is actually playing back. Hello.
Okay, we don't have, we are not facing that, Netik. Can you just check? I know, I understand. What do we do?
So I think there is some issue.
Natik, do you have an attendee view open?
My own voice from before is actually playing.
Is it
So
fine?
what is happening? So basically, the no.
Try rejoining, Netik. And as Jacob mentioned, if check if you have an attendee view also open.
Attendee view.
in any of
Checking.
the.
Mm, yeah. Hello. Am I audible now?
You are.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So sorry about that. I think you're right, Jacob. I think there was an attentive view open, and my voice was just playing back to me from before. Sorry about that. Uh,
Reiterating what you're saying.
yeah. Yeah. So got a bit confused.
Good.
Right.
Good.
Right. Thank you so much. So, going back to the modular aspect, I was talking about fundraising and breaking the entire fundraising process down. If we look at on one side lead generation, on another side grants, on other side crowdfunding, and lastly uh, converting these into actual donors who would be funding for these organizations. We need to be able to break down these processes in such a way that uh, tomorrow, if lead generation needs to be used for uh, onboarding partners for a program, it should be used, right? It can't be that this lead generation process only works for the fundraising department. So it cannot be so intrinsically uh, 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 connected to that particular department that it it it's impossible to use it for other different processes. So that's where each process, it's important to break it down into smaller groups where it can be picked up and duplicated. Now this is where scalability really becomes an important indicator, because um, when you wish to scale one program to another, the first thing donors actually look for is uh, how modular or how uh, uh, flexible are the organization's processes in such a way that it can actually be duplicated into multiple programs. It could be across multiple programs, it could be across multiple geographies. Now these all become a question, and modular is what becomes the indicator here. Moving from there to one of the last indicators that we wish to discuss here, being the adaptable.
Nitik,
Um,
and can we spend some time on the scalability part also?
right, absolutely, Randir. Yeah,
Okay. So what I wanted to talk about scalability essentially is, are we able to see one of the key things or key requirements from dev sector is to reach out to more and more folks. Okay. Why I'm saying that is because you have a best practice, you have a way of doing some kind of an intervention and program. You have come out with a framework and approach of improving some of the parameters on which you are working. Now, it will be good for the organization, for the country or the society to whom you are serving, if you are able to take this across multiple other regions also. What I'm talking about is, we work with multiple NGOs, and are working with an NGO based in Delhi. Okay, and they work with vulnerables. Okay, and excellent job. Not only in their in multiple geographies, but in over the past, I think 2 to 3 decades of their existence, they have not been able to scale across. Their model is excellent. It is having huge impact, but it is not scalable. Or rather, they are not able. It's scalable, but they are not able to scale. Okay. Now, this is critical. This is important because you should be able to scale and take it across multiple geographies, so that whatever good work you're doing, it more and more the folks in the society are able to avail that. So scalability comes from that perspective. What is scalability basically? Scalability is nothing but moving away, taking knowledge away from the individual who is having that knowledge and putting that into the process and tools, so that the process and tools can do the job that an individual is doing. Scalability. So we have always heard of economies of scale, right? When we talk about economies of scale, how much can you scale up? So, for example, if I'm a tutor, for example, and I take tuition classes. Now, how much can I scale up? I can scale up in the sense I can teach 8 hours in a day. I cannot scale beyond that, right? That is my economics. That is my limit. But can I reach, say, lot many students? I can, but my model has to be changed. It has to be process or system driven, wherein I can say, for example, I can go into Coursera, add my courses, then I'm becoming more and more scalable. Now, this concept is very critical from an NGO perspective. How are you making it more scalable? Whatever activities you are doing, are your processes scalable? Are you enabling making your processes scalable so that you can cater to more folks? That's a critical piece. Okay, Nitik, yeah.
Thank you, Randir. And in fact, that actually points us to the last indicator here on adaptability. Because when you were talking about the NGO based out of Delhi, one question is, to what extent is there a variation in the tasks that are performed, right? Because that's where that inefficiency stems from, and that inefficiency grows, creating unstandardized. Now, bringing back to the entire process streamlining, process sustainability, it creates a sort of inefficient system in the organization where I think if we go back to the case study that Jacob was narrating, one thing that we saw is that everybody is taking their own initiatives, and some people send messages, some people on WhatsApp, some people send emails for communication. If you look at this, in some cases the partners are getting their money on time, in some cases they are not. Now, all of this points to the fact that the processes are not adaptable, right? There is a lot of variation in a huge degree of variation in the way tasks are performed. Now, this is what is really affecting scale. And one of the reasons why we are talking about scalability is because for an organization to be scalable, and that is in fact a huge requirement uh, from a lot of donors, CSRs, and funders, because they don't want to just keep doing the same thing over and over again. They want to help 100 people, but next year they want to move to 150 people. The year after, they want to move to multiple locations of 100 people each, right? So the demography changes, the geography changes, and that is what scale really means. And for an organization to be scalable, they need to be sustainable, and for an organization to be sustainable, they need to be streamlined. And this is where process streamlining, process sustainability, and process scalability really come to play. And now, if we go back to this particular NGO, Abhi, and if we can look at what those issues highlighted by Star Foundation might be, there is a very good chance Star Foundation may have come back to them and say, uh, one of the reasons why we don't want to fund you is your organization is not scalable. You've been helping 25,000 NGOs, sorry, 25,000 students all this while, but we would have hoped for you to have increased that, or at least move to another location, move to a different district, scale your program so that way we, because none of these donors and foundations want to be a charity. What they want to do, what they want to be is a catalyst to initiate that social impact chain, which can actually go from one community to another. And that's where scalability, sustainability, and streamlining becomes super important. So this is our first case study and our analysis of what was the problem here, and we've pointed at processes as the key problem. So if there are any questions, observations, if anybody wants to point something out, if there's something that we've missed, I see quite a few faculties from a few institutions also here. If there are any questions or if suggestions that you want to add, feel free to drop it in the chat below. Randir, Jacob, if you want to add a point or two in the chat, feel free to do so as well. We can take a couple of seconds to hear. Right. So as and when, if any of you can think of any points that you wish to add to the problem of process that we've contextualized, feel free to do so. So if that's all right, I think we can move to the next case study. This is a case study about an NGO called Jalam. I will hand it over to Jacob to uh, contextualize it and narrate it. Over to you, Jacob.
Thanks, Nitik. So we'll follow a similar process for this as well. We'll look at the NGO, the context, the situation it is in, and try to think of the potential problems that the NGO might be facing. All right, so we'll please do read along with me. All right. So Jalam, an NGO working in the water and sanitation sector, is dedicated to improving access to adequate facilities for communities in need. They work on delivering clean water and safe sanitation solutions to communities across the country. Jalam runs a lean organization with very few employees. There have been instances of individual employees taking care of entire projects all the way from A to Z by themselves, while many other employees are very dependent on their manager's supervision and only work when micromanaged. To get the ball rolling, everyone resorts to what's comfortable for them, whether it's writing handwritten reports or sending documents through WhatsApp. The employees at Jalam do it all to achieve their goals. Now, the situation is that the NGO's primary CSR donor, HDFS Bank, wants to scale Jalam's operation to two more states. It conducts an audit to review Jalam's capacity to scale and finds a few concerns. Now, if you have any suggestions or guess on what these concerns could be, please let us know in the chat box. Uh,
Yeah, thank you so much, Jacob. Um, I think at first thought, it seems a bit obvious as to what the issue could be, and one might think that it's a process related issue again, because people are taking care of their projects by themselves. Some people like to be micromanaged. Some people send reports through WhatsApps, etc., and some people don't. But is that really the concern that the HDFS bank is really putting forth? Is again something that we need to look at here. So if anybody from the audience has any thoughts, views on what those possible challenges, problems could be, would love to hear from you. Randeep, Jacob, feel free to take a stab at it, and any problems that Jacob, maybe while you were reading, you found, or uh, Randeep, if you think that there is an issue here, please feel free to add.
Yes, Nitik. Yeah.
Right. So I'll go ahead and get started here. I think one thing that I really noticed is that one is Jalam is a lean organization. So first of all, I do think Jalam may have done a slightly better job at handling its processes, because for a small organization with fewer employees than Abhi, to actually be delivering clean, safe water across communities across the country means that uh, they definitely have their processes right, which means that to an extent they're able to manage quite a lot of these things well. And that is where, if you see, the situation here is not that HDFS bank doesn't want to fund them, right? They're happily willing to fund them, and in fact they're saying we want to fund you more, so let's scale to few more other states, because they're already across a couple of communities in one state now. But when it does an audit to review Jalam's capacity to scale, there are a few concerns, is what the situation is. So if you look at the second paragraph, you see two kind of people. One is basically a few individual employees who are trying to take care of all those projects by themselves. I'm sure we have people in all our organizations who probably are single-handedly running a lot of things, and at the same time, Jalam also has other employees who are very, very dependent on their managers' supervision, and they only work when micromanaged. I'm sure we all have such employees in our organizations as well. Now, why is this written here, and why is this a problem for HDFS Bank, is what we uh, really want to look at. And while that is one concern, another thing is, as Jacob narrated, all these employees are resorting to what's comfortable around them, right? Sometimes, again, going back to the process, small process problem of some people create handwritten reports, or some people create these reports and send it via WhatsApp or email. There doesn't, again, seem to be a lot of standardization in the way these people are, these employees are really managing the work to achieve the goal. So with that as a few problems that we're able to identify, let's sort of dissect and understand what is at the center of the issue here. Jacob? did you say
Yeah.
something? Do you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to also talk about the point where you had mentioned, right, where there are certain employees that are doing most of the tasks by themselves. And there's one perspective, that one way to look at it is that, oh my, all the employees are really good at what they're doing and they're really capable that they can run an entire project by themselves. But I think another way to look at it is also that the dependency on these employees are really, really high. So at any point, if such an employee leaves, they don't just leave; they also take all that knowledge away with them. So if there is no proper documentation on or proper knowledge transfer that's happening, this becomes a huge problem, because once an employee leaves, nobody else knows how to handle that project or how to run that system. So while at a surface level, it seems like a good thing that you have employees that can do everything, it might not be very good in the long run. I think Ranveer had also discussed something like this earlier about knowledge workers and how organizations should be looking at the knowledge rather than just the employees themselves. So
Thank you so much, Jacob. That, in fact, is a very valid point, and it, in fact, brings us to the whole problem of knowledge management, right? So, when we look at these and looking at the
Uh,
current economy
Nitin,
as
can I?
well.
Sorry.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Please go on,
I'm
Ranveer.
sorry.
Yeah.
I apologize. I just wanted to come in because Jacob brought this point, very interesting. So sometime back, I was speaking in a MSME forum, okay, and this MSME forum. I was invited to talk about knowledge management and how we can leverage KM to make MSMEs much more efficient and effective. So I was studying the MSMEs, and what I found was that the across India, okay, the formal in the formal sector, registered companies, 99 percentage of the registered companies are in India. 97 rather, I think 97 or 96 percentage of the companies formally registered in India are MSMEs. 96 is actually micro. Okay. Micro is five or less, if I'm not wrong. The definitions have been changing, but at that time it was five and less. And these five and less companies are around 96 percentage in India. That means they are not able to grow at all. Okay, they are not able to scale beyond five member, and the reasons that have been said is that the owner or the who owns the company, that person has got all the knowledge. They don't want to share it at all. So they will be like a multi-talented person. End to end, they will be able to do it. But they are not keen to share their knowledge with others, or they are not able to share their knowledge. Okay. So these MSMEs don't grow at all. They don't go from micro to small to medium and larger. They don't want to begin. Now, if you take the case with NGOs in India also, interestingly, it's the same thing. If you look into NGOs, we've got a huge number. I don't know the number. I'm not very clear about, but it's somewhere around 3 million is what one time the data was showing. I may be wrong, but somewhere around that number. Now, in that itself, the majority of them are one member, two member, or maximum five member NGOs. Now, the problem here, see, most of the NGOs are formed based on passion. Somebody is passionate about a cause, and you're going for that, and you're passionate, but your passion, because you're passionate, you'll be able to make a huge impact, but you do not know how to scale up. And because of that, while you're passionate about it, the number of folks whom you can reach out to is limited. You may be able to reach out to, say, folks limited to a city in the town in which, or in the district in which you're working. That is the kind of challenge most of the NGOs. The scalability is a huge problem. The knowledge doesn't get pulled out from the few people who are working in that and get embedded. See, if you look into MSME, you can understand, okay, the owner doesn't want to share, but here there is a passionate person who wants to share, because he or she wants to reach more and more people, but they are not able to scale because they are not able to get their knowledge out of it, make a system out of it, make it into a process, make it into tools, and grow the organization. It is not process driven at all. So that has a huge impact. You're not able to scale up at all. You're not able to leverage technology so that you can scale up and you can take it to different places. The tools are there, the process, the thought process are there, but it is not getting added or inculcated into the system. So that the NGOs or The founders can take forward what they wanted to do to more and more folks. So the way they were talking about the case study. Even if you have a donor who is ready to support you, if you try to scale, you may die down. That is the challenge. Okay. Yeah, Nitik, I just wanted to share.
No, thanks, Randir. And just wanted to see if Jacob is on the call because I'm not able to hear.
Jacob dropped off, I
Yeah,
think.
I just dropped off. I think I'm back now.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, we can hear you. Right. So thank you so much, Randir and Jacob, for contextualizing that. One thing I think both of you were pointing towards is basically actually saying that we shouldn't put all our eggs in one basket, because at the end of the day, it becomes a major problem for an organization to rely on one or two people the most, right? I mean, a lot of the times, Randir, like you said, it's the founder or the CEOs themselves, and because of which they're unable to scale because they are unable to transfer their knowledge to someone else. But to what to the point Jacob also made in terms of a few other people in the organization who have all the knowledge. Now, when there is attrition or these people want to start their own organization or want to move to a different organization, it becomes there's a huge knowledge leak, and replacing them becomes a big uh, problem, because of which scale at the end of the day gets affected again. And that's in fact what we are looking at here in this mind map that you see, contextualizing it, this entire problem of Jalam to people in that organization. Number one is, to what extent are the people in that organization actually upskilled, right? So if there are a few people in the organization who are dependent on their managers, on their team leads for supervision, it means that these people at the end of the day may not really have the uh, competency to work on things more than what their managers actually assign them. So that's where we are contextualizing one indicator, which is competency. Number two is mission driven. I think Randir was also in some ways talking about this, which is in terms of to what extent do employees in that particular organization are able to connect to the culture of that particular organization, right? So if there is an NGO like Chalam that is working uh, for a few SDGs which improve the water and sanitation facilities in the country, to what extent uh, are the employees in the NGO also are connected to this, and to what extent does the NGO or the organization ensure that the employees feel that uh, 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 connect to the mission or that support at the end of the day. Next indicator here is in terms of independence. I think this is where one of the things that we saw with respect to manager supervision and micromanagement becomes an important aspect for a lot of these uh, NGOs to uh, for a lot of these NGOs to really work in terms of managers assigning tasks. Now, is that really the best way to organize your tasks in an organization becomes a question, because at the end of the day, these employees in the organization need to be more independent. They need to move towards a self-motivated, initiative-driven way of working, so they can actually help improve the organization and take it to the next level through continuous improvement, as we saw in our last a few last slides. So this is where the this sort of leads to the next indicator, which is innovation, which is where if you let the employees be independent, if you give them the right kind of technological competencies, if you give them the right kind of tools, if you support in a way they're connected to the mission, and you give them that independence, that opens doors for innovation, and innovation becomes the most basic fundamental aspect for that particular organization to scale. Because if you are going to look at a program and there is a problem that you're trying to solve in any sector, so in this case water and sanitation sector, every single employee there needs to be looking at that problem
innovatively. They need to look at it from a different perspective each time, come out with better solutions, come out with solutions their managers would not have expected. And that is when these employees can have people under them and they can start mentoring them. And that's where innovation becomes a super key element. Now, all these four elements, competencies, upskilling them through competency, defining their competencies and training them, making sure that they are mission driven, giving them that independence, fostering a culture of innovation. This is where employee retention comes into place. As we see right now in the sector, there is a lot of attrition that is happening in the non-profit sector. A lot of employees don't feel that connect to the organization and leave the organization at the end of the day. Some people cite well-being as a problem, some people cite lack of training and structure as a problem, some people cite micromanagement as a problem, and some people just are not passionate enough. Now, how do you retain these employees? Because that's a huge plus point for these organizations and for donors to look at a particular organization if they're funding them, right? So you can't fund an organization which has a attrition rate of 60 to 70%, which means that if you fund a program and 60 to 70% of the people in that program are going to leave at the end of the year, then there's not a lot of learning and best practices you can share from that program to next program. And this is where we contextualize the entire uh, 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 problem of this particular NGO Jalam to its personnel, because even with a few personnel in that NGO, there's a lot of issues like a couple of people having all the knowledge in the organization, most of the others not having that independence to actually innovate and take new initiatives. And HDFS Bank is seeing this as an issue for scalability in the future. And this is where we believe that contextualizing it to the problem of personnel makes a lot of sense. And this is where, through personnel streamlining, we look at technological proficiency and competency. For personal sustainability, we look at mission driven and employee retention. And lastly, for personnel scalability, we look at independence and innovation. And going back to our case study, this is where I think, as Randir was also talking about, scaling this as an NGO becomes super important at the end of the day, because only then will funders and donors be willing to come and fund you. So even if you have done a fantastic job of bringing in some good impact and you've shown impact, but you as an organization are unable to scale due to issues related to processes or personnel, it becomes a red flag for these donors and funders. And these might be one of the reasons why you as an organization may not get accepted for a few grants or may not get that funding at the end of the day. End of the day. So that actually concludes our second case study. If anybody has any questions, points to remark, feel free to do that. I think there is one poll that Jacob has run. Do you think knowledge management is at the core of scalability for organizations? Feel free to add. I think if Randir had the choice, he would probably say yes to everybody. But feel free.
Yeah.
Do you have any things to add
See,
here?
essentially, Netik, from a org perspective, why I'm saying that knowledge management is the core is because when an organization grows, I mean, I'll talk from both scalability as well as continuous improvement. Okay, so for example, continuous improvement, you take, there is a huge knowledge decay that happens. Okay, if you don't learn on keep on learning, then the knowledge that you have doesn't grow. It's a decaying stage. Okay, so you keep on doing the way you've been doing always, but technology keeps on changing. Okay, so you're not learning. Basically, essentially, what it means is that you're stagnant. Your knowledge is not growing. Okay, so that is from a continuous improvement perspective. Now, scalability and knowledge management, how it is happening. Now, how does scalability happen? You scale when you, anything that we do, when it is done by human beings, cannot be scaled as much as if it is done by machines. Or if it is done by human beings also, it has to be managed in a way it can be easily taught to another person, so that the person can pick up and go fast. The challenge of scalability is this. Now, how does knowledge management help? Knowledge management helps in culling out this information and knowledge that the employees have, the individuals have, bring it out, either enable it to be shared with multiple people or embed it into tools and machines that are being used. So I keep on talking about tools and machines. What it means is that, say, for example, mobile apps. Now, mobile apps came, and what has mobile apps helped in the NGO sector? It has made data collection much faster, right? I mean, you cannot carry a laptop and move around and capture data. You can, but it's a limited activity. You can take a notebook, you can take a pen and paper, and you can make it note it down. Again, that's a weak system. But if you use a mobile phone, right, mobile phone enabled system which can talk to people and we can capture the data and it can easily relate to a database, you're actually scaling up yourself faster. So earlier you would have required some 15, 20 volunteers to do this data collection. You may not need so many, because one volunteer is enough to capture the data much faster. That is scalability. So you have all you if you got 20 volunteers reach will be much higher with your mobile app kind of a data collection system where you have a voice enabled system. And you don't even need to do that. You just have to set up some places where you are capturing the data, right?
Absolutely.
So that is the scale concept of scalability that is coming. You're taking the knowledge and you're putting into the machine and then running it. That is pure application of knowledge management from an automation perspective.
Right. And I think just responding to that example of applications that you gave, I think that's where you very beautifully married the concept of technology enablement to knowledge management, because both sort of go hand in hand, right? And that's what we're trying to say through this workshop as well. On for organizations to be smart, they need to technovate, right? They need to innovate their practices, and that's where using knowledge management for that through best practices and collaboration comes into picture. And using technology, because one thing I think Jacob also talked about earlier was that the pandemic became a catalyst in technology enablement and digital transformation. So these putting these two things together automatically sets a foundation for the organization to be able to scale in the future. So thanks for bringing that up, Randy. Sorry, I think I cut you off. If you want to add anything more, please feel free to.
I'm done, I think. Go ahead.
Okay, great. All right, so I think that concludes our case study 2 as well. So to just do a quick summary, we in our case study 1, we looked at the Abhi NGO, which had a problem with its processes, because of which the Star Foundation wasn't willing to donate, and we contextualize it to the problem of processes across standardization, automation, resilience, improvement, modular, and adaptability. Case study 2 looked slightly different from a slightly different perspective at Jalam as an NGO. Here, the issue was contextualized to its employees or personnel, as we call it, with competencies. Are they mission driven? How much independence do they have? Are they innovative? How much retention does the organization have? And their technological proficiencies were looked at the indicators. Basically, if you looked at so far, what we have done is introduce you to the first P, process, second P, personnel, and 3 S's, if you remember, the streamlined, scalability, and sustainability. And through that, now we want to say what are these functions involved in creating successful programs, and we want to introduce the third P, programs, right? So now you may see a lot of functions here. Randir, Jacob, feel free to add, or anybody in the audience, if you think that you're able to relate to the problem that we have talked about in terms of lack of efficiency across these functions, feel free to chime in. What we're trying to say here is that for a program to be successful, and this, I think, in the post that Jacob posted yesterday on the RISE community was in many ways referring to this, which is for a program to be function, of course, there is the technical side. And when I say technical here, the programmatic technical side, in terms of how well is the program planned, how good is the implementation plan, how responsive is the community. Of course, all of that becomes a critical factor to the success of the program. In fact, that takes the more weightage. But at the end of the day, a lot of NGOs aren't able to go beyond a certain level of impact. That's because for them to be able to achieve more impact, some foundations need to be set straight. And that's what we try to introduce through the concept of first two P's, personnel and processes, right? And now if we look at certain functions within the organization, it could be grant management, it could be donor reporting, donor fundraising, it could be task management, it could be payroll and HR management. Across each of these, we see most of these demands are being met manually. For example, I'm sure at a lot of organizations that we've spoken to, and I'm sure in your organizations as well, a lot of these tasks are very assigned on an ad hoc basis. There is a manager, and that manager has been given an objective by a director or someone from the senior leadership. It is basically to uh, fund fundraise, let's say, 15 lakhs by the end of quarter 1. Now, this manager goes and gives tasks on an ad hoc basis to his or her employees. The what it would typically look like is, say, something like, let's do an email campaign of 25 people. So the employee at the end of the day doesn't know what this task is about, doesn't know what the objective of this task is, but is simply doing because it's a task given to them by their manager, right? So this is where we talk about it's being done manually. It's assigned over WhatsApp, and the manager gives maybe on day one because the leadership told them it's about 7 8. Neither the employee nor the manager is able to track it at the end of the day, and at the end of the quarter when the targets are not being met, that's when the manager is able to recall a couple of these tasks that have not been done, and it becomes a problem of the employee to deal with that, right? And that's where uh, this whole ad hoc way of managing these functions is in fact affecting the impact of these programs. It has, as we have written at the bottom of this page, this has in fact led to a lack of efficiency, time, and resources. It has reduced the effectiveness of the organization, and at the end of the day, limited the knowledge sharing that's happening. So, this coming back to what Randir was originally talking about. Now, this can be looked at any of the functions that's written here, from capacity building to donor reporting and fundraising. I think one of the points that Jacob made earlier during his narration was that Excel sheets are being used heavily to collect data and monitor data. Now, are Excel sheets the best way to show impact at a donor level or at a funder level? Because Excel sheets don't really indicate that. And that is where we are trying to say that all of these cannot really be met manually, and they need to be re-looked at. They need to be technovated to be able to reach a higher impact. So, Jacob, Randir, if you have any thoughts or points that you want to add. Jacob, I think one interesting thing that we had a conversation recently in terms of how even using Excel sheets, how Technovation can be used. If you have any points to add to this, feel free to chime in at any point.
Yeah. So even with Excel sheet, I think a lot of it is based on. See, the thing is, all technologies, right? Most technologies are always updating, and you have newer features coming up. But the thing is, we are so used to working with older models or working in our comfort zones that most of the time we don't want to explore new things or even utilize features that are already in the technology. For example, Excel 10 years ago and Excel now is vastly different, right? Even if the user interface, or even if at a glance it looks very much the same, or you have all the cells and the interface, but a lot more features have come. I think even people who've been using Excel for a long time might not be aware of these new features, and I think that changes things a lot, because if you still want to keep using Excel, that's fine. But to be able to incorporate the newer additions and features is also a part of Technovation. So if you are still just using the basic features of Excel, then there is no, as much as we are staying in our comfort zone, we are still not using it to its full potential. So I think that can be applied to a lot of technologies. So yeah, I think it's a mindset.
Absolutely. Right, right. Thank you, Jacob. Ranjit, I think you wish to add here.
I'm not a big fan of Excel, so Jacob will curse me now. But the reality is that Excel is extensively used in the industry, and as Jacob rightly pointed out, the features are not getting used. So if you love to use Excel, yes, use it, but it's a very powerful tool. Use all the features. Okay. I've seen some of the videos that have come on Excel where Excel is integrated with emails so that you can set up email alerts and all these things. Emails can be sent to different folks, reminding of different activities. But what I've seen in the industry, in development sector, and typically Excel is referred as MIS. So initially, when we started, when we were working, and when we heard MIS, we thought it's a whole system, but it is not. It's an Excel-based system, and nothing wrong in that. But the thing is, how it has to be used is very critical, because typically what happens after a year or 2 year, when you're using the same Excel sheet, you will end up making some 15-20,000 lines, okay, because of all the discussions, engagements that is going on. One challenge is the file becomes very heavy. Second is multiple versions, Netik, as you are pointing out. So there are, and the other thing is this data, there are tools that are available that can use this data to do a lot of things. You can build your dashboard on top of it, and you can set up alerts, you can follow ups, you can do quite a lot of things, but those things are not getting done. Okay, and this is a problem. But I don't have a number, but my hunch is 90 to 90% or more of the NGOs are running their business on Excel only, to track the numbers, to track the donor numbers, to track the project numbers, for the impact of their activity that they're doing. Everything is Excel based. Okay, so I'm not saying that we should go away completely from Excel, but we should intelligently handle Excel and use the tool in a way you're getting the most out of it. You're not duplicating data, and you're not completely, what you call that, you're damaging your Excel sheets in the sense, in a way that it becomes too heavy and you're not able, the system doesn't recognize it at all or open it at all. So these are some challenges that can come up, but it's a very powerful tool. It has to be used intelligently.
Absolutely, Randir. And in fact, I think one thing that Jacob said, and you also were adding to, when Excel was introduced, it was supposed to replace these registers, right? Because it was a way of putting together data in an organized manner. And unfortunately, that is what it's mostly still being used for. It's for just data collection and putting data in a place where instead of using a 100-page register, now it has become a 1,000-page 1,000 rows Excel. And that's where I think, to the point that Jacob was saying, what Excel was being used for 10 years ago is pretty much the same it's being used for, except a few maybe unique cases, right? So what we are also trying to say here for the audience is that it's important to technovate, right? So when you're looking at programs, be it you're looking at Excel, be it any other tool, be it across Microsoft, Google, any of these tools, one thing that Randeep was saying, and going back to that, is how do we technovate? How do we bring in that aspect of innovation to use technology more and more for impact? And that's what this entire workshop is about. So one interesting thing that Randeep pointed out in terms of Excel being used for email automation. Now, a lot of nonprofits don't know that Microsoft Excel can be automated in such a way that emails can actually be sent out, right? So how many nonprofits are actually utilizing this for their fundraising function? Now, that is a very simple thing to think about, but that in fact is it's technovating, right? Using the technology that you have and innovating to ensure that you don't have to send 150, 200 emails again and again. Of course, there are tools like MailChimp, HubSpot, Zoho CRM, Microsoft Dynamics, etc. But these are all paid tools, and a lot of the times nonprofits aren't able to afford these, be it Salesforce or be it any of these tools. And that's where utilizing a simple tool like Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets to automate this process, in fact, puts you ahead uh, of all the other organizations in the sector and helps you reach higher impact at the end of the day. So that's what this the whole point of this slide was, to look at the different functions that support programs and in what way have they become inefficient. And if you look at it, the way we have structured this entire thing is we showed the first P, processes, second P, personnel, and now the third P, programs, which is what the main objective is for a lot of non those processes and personnel need to be streamlined, sustainable, and scalable. And that actually introduces us to the three P's, which is what we've been um, building up for all this while, which is uh, on one side, we have programs at the top for which the personnel provide a base, and at the bottom is processes based on which the organization is built. Essentially, processes are like what cells are to a human body. That everything in an organization runs based on processes, and these processes are what the personnel or the employees in the organization employ to work on their tasks. And together, that's how you go towards completing different programs and hence achieving higher impact. So the first uh, thesis statement, if I may say, of our framework is that these three P's become essential to achieving a higher impact. And that brings us to the concept of SMART. And this is where we want to introduce the concept of building smart organizations. Before I talk about smart in the context of development sector, Randir, would love to hear from you about smart in general, because it's something that you have been talking about for 4 years since I've been with you, and for more than a decade, since you have been talking about knowledge management and what this concept of smart organizations really is. So would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, thanks, Natik. Smart organization is very close to my heart. We've been doing a lot of work on that, trying to understand it as well as evolve it. So smart organizations, the way we are conceptualizing is simple, nothing great. So you have smartphones, you have smart cars, right? I mean, everywhere everything is becoming smart. Whatever you touch it, everything is. The we are embedding smartness into all the devices that we have, right? I mean, so a car that you're driving, right? I mean, it is smart and it can understand the person who is driving it, and based on that, educate the person as well as the car can drive on its own. So it's a car that is learning. Okay, same case with the apps that are coming up. Right? Chat GPT has come up. It is learning. It keeps on learning. Now, organizations are also expected to learn the way I was checking, learning, continuously learning. If an organization doesn't learn fast, it will die down. Now, can an organization learn on its own? And that is the base concept of smartness. Can an organization learn on its own continuously and grow by that? Okay. So is that possible? That is the whole concept of smartness. And what we are trying to say is that a smart organization is one that continuously learns on its own without major push by the human beings and manages on its own. So there are two parts: learn on its own and manages on its own. Right. So essentially, we are getting into an era where organizations will become self-managing. They will be able to handle many of their own activities on their own by being AI driven. That is the whole concept of smartness, right? I mean, learning. So, see, typically, okay, don't get me wrong, but typically, human driven learning is slow in an organization because it is human driven, okay? Because we learn, an individual learn in an organization, but that learning is not shared across. It may be because of individual's behavior or the individual's nature of work that is being done, but the individual doesn't share across. So because of that, the learning slows down. and the organization's learning path will be not a steep path, will be but more or less like horizontal. And that is the whole concept of smartness. In a smart organization, the organization learns on its own. In the sense, while the knowledge is generated by the employees, it gets embedded into the systems through the intervention of the machines, and then it is taken across the organization. So these organizations learn very fast. So they will have a steep growth with respect to their ability to be more efficient and effective. And that is the concept that we are trying to evolve in from as smart organizations. And hopefully in the next few years we will, and we are not very far with realizing this dream of having smart organizations with AI growing extremely fast. I mean, fast. Last year we had generational AI coming out with Chat GPT, with most of us are already hearing about. We should be seeing the smartness in organizations becoming more smart or more advanced. Okay. So this is thanks, Natik. I mean, you gave me an opportunity, and I will not stop talking about smartness, but I can go on and on and on. But yeah, I'll hand it over to you.
No, that's very interesting, Randy. 2 points. One is, I mean, the way ChatGPT has gone viral, we don't really need to get into whether uh, how good is it for the society and everything. But keeping all of that aside, this whole concept of smart, a lot of people have assumed wrong, thinking that smart means artificial intelligence, because you don't really need artificial intelligence to be a smart organization, right? That's point one. Point two, to something that you responded in terms of organizations that need to learn on its own. Now, I've seen through a lot of our conversations with these nonprofits, smart is actually a taboo word. If you recall a lot of our conversations, because a lot of these founders and leaders come back to us and tell us that let's first finish our programs and then we can think about being smart. But what a lot of these organizations don't realize is that being smart, as we have pointed out here, is actually crucial, very, very crucial, in fact, for them to reach higher impact, right? Because it's through smart we are saying, oh, your programs need to be streamlined, your processes need to be sustainable, your personnel need to be scalable at the end of the day. And what is unfortunate is that, I mean, I think this is something that we as a country have also looked at, and development sector also a lot of the times look at, and I hope none of the attendees really curse me for saying this. The point here is, a lot, this is the mindset in the sector, right? Let the private sector first do it, let them do, let it get done, let the technology and let everything get cheaper, and that's when we are going to adopt it. What the private sector sees being adopted in this year probably takes about 2, 3, or 4 or 5 years for the development sector to adapt it. And that's what we really wish to change by technovating, because technovation doesn't always mean bringing in new products, bringing in new fancy technologies or new SaaS related products which can help you. It also means about how do you rethink the way you are actually performing in your organization. We are actually going to the basics, saying how can you smartify your processes, right? How can you make your processes smart? How can you standardize them? How can you automate them using something as simple as Excel sheets or Google Sheets, in such a way it reduces the work of the organization. And even if an employee leaves the organization, or if unexpected changes like pandemic hit, your organization needs to be resilient enough at the end of the day to be able to not just uh, handle that particular unexpected change, but also be anti-fragile or be robust enough to learn from it and move forward. So thank you, Randir, for actually introducing the concept of smart here. And to contextualize it to the nonprofit sector, what we are trying to do as a framework here is uh, right. So I think thank you so much, Aparna. I just saw a question and I thought this is the first question. I thought I'll jump into it. Should smart not include traditional indigenous learning? Absolutely, absolutely, Aparna. It needs to also include, and I hope by traditional indigenous you're also talking about learning that comes through the communities that these organizations work with. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Absolutely, and that's where
when we talk about smart, we are not just talking about technology. It is just one small element, or we're not talking about AI at all. We are actually, in fact, talking about best practices that is being shared. We're talking about knowledge management. We're talking about new things that organization produces that can actually be collaborated with internally in that particular organization, and that actually brings us to the five
I'll
elements
just
of smart. Yeah, yeah,
add to what you said. I think we'll be running short of time, but I'll quickly complete it. What Aparna had asked for. Should
yeah.
smart not include traditional indigenous knowledge? It should include. As a matter of fact, that is critical, and the focus of smartness is that unearth all those indigenous knowledge and bring it up and bring it and cross leverage it. That is the critical thing, because
Correct.
what one important thing that happens in the NGO sector is a lot of indigenous knowledge is created, but unfortunately those knowledge doesn't get captured. The moment that knowledge gets created in the field, how do we ensure that that is tapped and that is cross leveraged? That is very critical. The traditional knowledge that is there, which we may miss out. So that is part of your smartness, that is not only bringing out that knowledge but inculcating in a way it is getting cross leveraged. It is not becoming just limited to one place but being applicable across places where it is relevant. That is the concept of application of smartness in the example that you're talking about. Go ahead, Naren.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, Randir. I think one point I wish to add here is that there is the organization and there is the community. Right now, community, I think, as Aparna is very rightly pointing out, there's a lot of uh, be it across whatever sector. If you're working with the community, be it a non-indigenous community, be it an urban community, across all communities, there's a lot of wisdom from the community in the way they are working, they have built their systems. Actually is the point of the organizations should not be to break that wheel, but look at that wheel, look at it from a different perspective, bring in the concept of smart to add and improve that, and not really change and break it, right? So that's where the concept of smart also, Aparna, to your point, is for these organizations to be built in such a way that these traditional wisdom, which a lot of organizations may feel threatened by, or may feel that if this is there, we may not really be able to bring in our inputs here, that shouldn't really be the case, right? These changes need to make the organizations anti-fragile, and these organizations need to learn from it and grow through it. And that's where we are saying the concept of smart, which makes these organizations, processes, programs, and uh, personnel streamlined, scale and sustainable, mission driven, and take those actionable insights and learnings. And that's where your point really comes in, which allows them to be more resilient, right? Being resilient means not just being flexible, not just being robust, but also anti fragile. So thank you so much for your point on that. um, so while now we have introduced the concept of smart, we wish to take this as an opportunity to introduce the model that we are trying to create. And this is what we call the SP cube model. Now, the three P's, right? Programs, personnel, processes. We have process at the base of the pyramid. We have personnel who use these processes to do their work, and personnel and processes together help implement these programs. So that's where the pyramid is built. Now, to achieve higher impact, how do we look at the three S's, right? Which is, how do we streamline them? How do we scale them? And how do we make them sustainable? Because, and this is our thesis, right? To be smart, you need to build programs that are streamlined, sustainable, and scalable. And to build these programs that are streamlined, sustainable, and scalable, you need to have processes and personnel which are also streamlined, scalable, and sustainable. This is essentially the SP cube model that we wish to introduce to the nonprofit sector and the development sector, and in fact can be utilized across every single organization in any other sector, be it academic institutes, be it even private organizations. And that's the beauty of this whole model. Now, using this model is where we are raising the question of how can this model be used to technovate impact in the development sector.
So saying this, we wish to show you the framework that we have built. Jacob, would you be able to share the link here?
Sorry, Natik, which one?
The @C link, I think the one you shared with me, or is it the form link? I wish to show it.
We can show the form.
Right. Is it visible? I hope it's visible.
Yes, yes.
Right. Absolutely, Aparna. I think thank you so much for the response. Absolutely, resilience does stem from being adaptable and in tune. I'll just want to respond to this before I move to the form. I think what Aparna is also pointing out is um, and in fact that actually very beautifully fits into our concept of smart is uh, where we actually talk about under I think uh, processes sustainability. And Aparna, I'm not sure if you were here before, but I think going back to one of our previous slides, um, right. So if you look at this, this is where Aparna is actually very rightly pointing out, which is these changes that are happening in the world, these unexpected changes, which at the end of the day have an impact on these processes, these organizations. The organizations, through the smart approach, need to be built in such a way that they are resilient enough, and that makes them adaptable to scale for the future. And that, in fact, becomes a core concept of smart under processes that can be built as sustainable and scalable at the end of the day. So thank you so much, Aparna, for bringing that out. Um, right, now moving quickly to the form or the framework that we have built. I just want to, Jacob, if it's possible for you, would love to have you read the SMART benchmark out and what we are trying to build here.
It's too small for me to read, Natik. I can't see.
Oh, is okay. Okay, no, not an issue. And just let me know if this is better, if you can, or if not, I can go ahead and read it.
Just give me a moment. I'll open it here so I can read. Yes. So the SMART framework recognizes that an organization needs to be streamlined to build sustainable and scalable programs. The SMART framework uses the SP cube model to state that for programs to be streamlined, sustainable, and scalable, its processes and personnel need to be streamlined, sustainable, and scalable. The SP cube model helps an organization understand where their processes, people, and programs stand in the ETMO scale, which is the early, defined, managed, or optimized.
Great. Thank you so much, Jacob. And to the audience, Jacob will be sharing this form at the end of the session. So feel free to come take our benchmarking test. And this is a test that's proprietary and that we are building. I just want to take a couple of minutes to actually fill this form with each of you. The objective being, I want to, with the audience, sort of understand what it means to analyze and understand if an organization is actually smart, and to what extent of smart level are they at. So I'm just filling this form. Right. So as I think Jacob talked about just now in the introduction to this concept of SMART and SP cube model, one thing that we are looking at is how do we build processes that are streamlined. Right now, to understand that, you also need to look at and see if these processes at the end of the day are streamlined, and to what extent are they streamlined in your organization. And that's where this concept of early, defined, managed, and optimized comes in. So for processes that are being streamlined, we look at, as you remember, if you remember standardization and automation as a couple of indicators here. So early is what we say an organization's processes are disorganized, uncontrolled. They're very reactive in nature at this level. The processes are not documented at all. If you think your organization in that is in that place, then it means that you are in the early stage. If you have some processes defined, right, you have some standard operating procedures, SOPs put in together, but there may be variations and exceptions. I think Randir was talking about it. If that is the case, then you're in the defined place. If you, as an organization, have defined SOPs or these are adopted in a good way, there's not a lot of variations and exceptions. However, they're being reviewed very well, but still there's more scope for improvement than we could say that you are in the managed state. Finally, in the optimize, the steps in these processes can be automated. If you remember, I was talking about the concept of modular in the very beginning, which means that we'll be able to break down these steps, automate them in such a way that the entire process is efficient. And as Randir was talking about, this is where, as an organization, it becomes smart enabled, which means that it doesn't really have to think about, changing things over and over again. Now, looking at the concept of, looking at the example, looking at the example of Abhi as an NGO, let's say that we can say it probably was not in an early stage, maybe in its defined stage. So we want to mark Abhi in the defined stage. Looking at process sustainability, let's look at Abhi. Here we say in the early stage, the processes are fragile and prone to breakdowns during unexpected events. Now, this is what seems like Abhi was at, because if you remember, Star Foundation pointed out the fact that there were a lot of policy municipality changes, and Randy talked about pandemic related changes. Now, if Abhi as an organization wasn't able to handle this well, it means it's safe to say that it's still in the early stage, because at a more defined or a managed stage, and as Aparna was also talking about, organizations here are able to withstand, are able to an extent withstand the kind of unexpected changes that comes. It's more robust, it's more anti-fragile, and they learn from it. So it's safe to say that we can mark Abhi in the early stage here. Moving forward to process scalability, we say in the early stage that the processes are inflexible, which means that there's not a lot of flexibility in the way they are being developed. In defined stage, we can say that the processes have become a bit more modular, means that they can be broken down into parts, but still in ways of implementation, there's definitely a lot of gaps. In managed stage, we say that it's definitely become more adaptable. Again, pointing out to what Aparna was talking about in terms of adaptability and resilience, because in process scalability, resilience becomes a huge important indicator. In this case, the optimized level looks like it is in such a way that when these processes are optimized, the organization is built in a way that this automation allows for continuous improvement to happen. And this could be across teams, branches, or programs. So I think it's safe to say Abhi here also falls in an early to defined stage, but because they're not very flexible in the way they're working, it makes, I think it's important to say they may fall under the early stage. Looking at personnel streamlined, I want to move from the example of Abhi to Jalam here, because that's where we contextualize. When we look at personnel streamlined, we're looking at we're looking at training and competencies as a way of indicating to what extent these personnel are streamlined. It's safe to say that Jalam was not that bad in terms of how they were trained. So it's good to say they were at a defined stage. But an optimized level, it would be such a way that the staff are continuously monitored, improved. And when you have to assign them to a particular program, they should be able to, there should be a system which should be able to say that person A and B, because of their competencies, can be mapped to a particular program. So this is where personnel streamlined comes in, and this is what our early defined, managed, optimized levels look like. What you could do this is you could take this test, analyze this for your own organization. I'm speeding through this a little bit because of lack of time, but you can go ahead and look at this, analyze it from your own perspective to see if which stage do you actually fit in. Now looking at personal sustainability, here we are looking at to what extent these organizations have have given emphasis on personnel's productivity, well-being, because these are important, right? Because for the organization to be sustainable, they need to retain their employees, and for them to retain their employees, then there needs to be a lot of feedback loops that are open. There needs to be a lot of uh, uh, there needs to be a lot of support that's provided from the organization, and the employees at the end of the day needs to feel mission driven. And now, as we saw from the Jalam example, this is also something that was missing. However, at the same time, there were quite a few people who were in fact motivated to work for the organization, and they were willing to take things on their own. So it's safe to say it probably falls into the defined category. Lastly is the personal scalability. Now, this was a huge issue because of which the HDFS Bank said this is where they raised the concerns, right? That the personnel do not seem scalable, and pointing out to the aspect that Randir mentioned in terms of how much independence employees need to have, or how innovative they need to be. It's safe to say here that Jalam falls in the early stage. That finishes the personnel. The second piece, streamlined scalability and sustainability factor. Finally, coming to programs. Now, this is more of an easy pass through for us because we have personnel and processes largely divided between early and defined, which means that programs are also pretty much going to be in the same place. Now, here it becomes important for us to define these programs in such a way that we understand that these programs at the end of the day can lead to more impact for that particular organization, right? So now if we look at early here, a lot of organizations quantitatively measure. If we take the example of Abhi, them saying that they've helped 25,000 NGOs means that their programs are in an early stage. In a defined stage, maybe they might be capturing better data and technology is probably used to streamline projects, but a proper monitoring and evaluation is missing, which is where maybe Excel sheets can be counted, but how well are dashboards utilized to show impact again becomes a question. So be it for Jalam or be it for Abhi, the two case studies that we talked about, I think defined is a good place for those organizations. Are your programs sustainable? Now, this is where a lot of donors ask non-profits and NGOs, right? Like, are your programs sustainable? Is there impact-centered reporting? How sustainable are your processes? How sustainable are your personnel? And hence, how sustainable are your programs? Which means that in an ideal optimized state, these programs need to use knowledge management and key learnings from different programs, as Randir was talking about, to build more and more programs across demographies or geographies. I think it's safe to say here also, both Abhi and Jalam, the examples that we gave only fall under defined state. Lastly, coming to one of the most important aspects that donors, CSRs, anybody really look into when they analyze nonprofits, when they sanction grants, is, are programs scalable, right? Doesn't matter if you have helped 25,000, 50,000, 1 lakh beneficiaries, but if year on year you're not able to scale your programs to a different community, to a different demography, to a different state, or to even in fact a different country, then there's a question of, is there improvement happening at a programmatic level or an organization level? And if the ecosystem is moving forward, but you as an organization are only looking at helping 25,000 people over and over again for a few years, then the donor will definitely relook at funding you, because as much as you are doing a fantastic job in supporting the community, that's not what donors need. Donors need programs to become streamlined, to become sustainable and scalable. And that's what means impact to them. So it's safe to say both Jalim and Abhi fall in the early phase here. So this is what our entire form really looks like. We call it the smart benchmark. We've created it using the SP cube model across personnel, programs, and processes. Now, this is a form. I request Jacob to put it on the chat as well so people can go ahead and fill it for their organizations. It doesn't matter if you're an academic institute, a donor CSR, or a nonprofit. You can fill this up to your own organization level and try to understand where your organization lies. Now, here is what a sample report looks like. This is a report that we generated before for the sake of this presentation. Now, in this report that Jacob Yeldos took, first, what you see is a SMART score versus an industry benchmark. Now, here, what we're saying is that based on the test that I showed you, we give you a SMART score, which is blue in color, and we have set an industry benchmark. This industry benchmark is based on our own experience with different organizations in the development sector. And you will be able to see where you lie as an organization as opposed to where the industry is in terms of how smart you are. Now, this is across process, personnel, and programs, as well as streamlined scalability and sustainability. Then we have gone ahead and created our own smart benchmark. Of course, we are not going to say it's ideal. You need to have the entire 9 boxes optimized to be smart, because that's not how the world works. Idealism doesn't really work that way. What we're trying to say is to be smart, to be considered smart, and for donors and funders to be able to fund you, and for your programs, processes, and personnel at the end of the day to be streamlined, sustainable, and scalable. The purple line that you see, we are saying that is the SMART benchmark. And when you take the test, you will be able to see where you lie within that benchmark. The test also provides more inputs on, it defines processes. It shows the indicators for each one. For streamlining, we have standardized and automation as indicators. And it talks about a couple of benefits here as well. For example, under sustainability, the benefit, if your processes become sustainable, it means you become more resistant to unexpected changes. If your processes become scalable, it means that you will be able to plan and scale for more programs across time, volume, and demography. Same goes for personnel. Timely completion of projects, effective strategy to combat attrition, increase in programmatic impact. These are all the benefits that our report can give. This is the free report. Please go ahead and feel free to take this report. This was developed for the sake of this workshop. This is a framework that we want to give for free for nonprofits, so they understand where they are in the entire SMART scale. Be it a donor CSR, if you want to look at it for your NGOs that you are funding, feel free to use it. If an academic institute and you think that you can help us improve this report further, please feel free to use it and tell us, how we can make it better. So this is what the SMART report looks like. We call it the SMART benchmarking. Our website should be up soon, and I hope Jacob would have shared the link to this here by now. Finally, going back to our asks from here, as you saw, overall, so far, we have shown the 3 Ps: programs, personnel, processes. We introduced you to the concept of SMART. How do you build streamlined, scale, sustainable, mission-driven, resilient, technology-enabled organizations, bringing us to the SP Cube model of programs, personnel, and processes. How can programs, personnel, and processes be streamlined, scaled, and sustainable to reach higher impact? Having said that, a couple of call to actions we have for all the audience here. If you are an academician and you think the SMART framework makes sense for, be it the development sector, for organizations in general, please write to us. We would love to collaborate with you, improve this. We want to look at ourselves and this framework as anti-fragile that can learn from the constructive criticism it might get. If you're an NGO or a nonprofit, take the SMART benchmarking test. I hope Jacob has put in the link again. If you're a donor or CSR, invite us to do a pilot for your nonprofits. We would love to work with you to analyze your NGOs and tell you if they're smart or not, and if their programs are streamlined, sustainable, and scalable or not, and how can we help them push towards it. If there are entrepreneurs and innovators here, partner with us to build and technovate impact for the development sector. So these are a few of our asks. So I think it's 1:30. We've hit the clock. Thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of this workshop.